Yama, hello and welcome. I'd like to welcome you all to the country in traditional Gomeroi language. Yama Gubia Nangu Gani, Naya Gi Nangu Dran, Nai Gamilorigal, Nama Yalgimawu Narga Yaladu, Nama Yalgiu Wurgai Nalai Dawuna Niani Gaga Yaladu. Hello, welcome to all. I'd like to acknowledge my Gomeroi people, the past and present, the traditional owners of this land that we're on today. Thank you.
My name is Neville Sampson, and I come from an Aboriginal mission called Wallolo. I was born there in 1938. I started school when I was 6 years old. Lots of times we went to school and we had no shoes because our parents couldn't afford to buy us a pair of shoes. At times we went in what we used to call sand shoes, and we used to say they were bats. And we used to whiten those up and wear them for years and years. So that's what we had to make use. But when we had an Aboriginal school and it was all Aboriginal kids were there, we had two rooms. One was called the big room, the other one was called the little room. There was another school that was in the village, and that was the whitefellas school. They only had about 10 students at that time. But we used to always welcome them to our school because we didn't want to be racist towards anyone. And that's why we always welcomed them across to our schools, and they used to come across, especially on Fridays, and they used to play different types of sports. In our school days, it was very, very tough. The teachers were a lot stricter than what they are today. Like today, school is very open. Like you could talk to girls and everything. But back in our time, we had a line drawn down the centre of the playground. The girls was on one side, the boys was on the other side. And we weren't allowed to wolf whistle to them or anything. We wasn't even allowed to talk to them at times until, when we went home and spoke to them then. But even then, our parents never ever allowed us out after dark. We was always whistling before the sun went down. And when I said we couldn't talk to girls, well, we wasn't allowed to see a girl until we was 18 years old. But at that time, it was run by managers of the old Department of Welfare, and they were very strict. They used to walk around late of evening and of a night time to see if you were still in the streets, what we used to call them then. If you was, they used to give you a whack over the head with a long torch and send you home. So that's the way it was, and so I eventually went to school into Grindai High at the age of 13 years old. I spent 2 years there because when I was 14 years and 9 months, I was allowed to leave the school if I had a job. And I eventually got a job, and my first job was burr cutting. And I was getting 30 shillings a week. That was my wage for the week. It didn't sound much money of what you say today, but back in those times, it was a lot of money. Like you could get a big bag of lollies, for about 5 cents or thing. So, you never ever done without, and you never went in. We used to go and hunt for rabbits and all that, and lots of times we made a living out of rabbits. We used to sell their carcasses. We also used to trap for the freezing works, and that's where we earned a bit of money that we could live on, a lot more. Wallolo Aboriginal Mission is situated 77 kilometres from Tamworth. It's about, in old miles, it's 15 miles west of Werris Creek. Wallolo Station was named after the big old Wallolo Station, which was a very big cattle station and sheep station. On Wallolo Station they used to run around 75,000 sheep, and they used to run well over 20-odd thousand of cattle. We was talking about the mission and what happened on the mission. It was run by the managers of the welfare board, and we used to, what they used to call then was rations. Like you get a bit of sugar, a bit of flour, and that. And they also used to give us milk. They had about 30 to 40 milking cows, and they used to milk those. They had a handyman, and he was named Charlie White at that time, and he always kept the mission in a very good order. He always mowed the grass down and everything, but he used to milk the cows every morning, and we used to go with our little billy cans up to the manager's place and would get a billy can of milk. And they also used to separate the cream from the milk, and the manager's wife used to make the old-time butter. And she used to always give us, like half a pound of that butter. But even back in those times, when we used to go across the shops, they used to give us these coupons that we used to have put across. Like you had a coupon for a sugar, you had a coupon for butter, and that. And you could only use one coupon a week. You didn't have to use any more. And likes of a lot of the other stuff too, you had to have coupons for them. The fruits and veggies, they were more or less a bit freer, but there wasn't a great lot of it around at that time. Bread was very limited. Like we used to have to go up there and wait late of the evening for the bus to come from Corindai, and they used to bring the bread out, and we were probably allowed up to 2 loaves of bread, but not anymore. That was every second day. So, but with the old Aboriginal people, with our mum and dad, they always used to get the flour and they'd make their own bread, and they do the old dampers, johnny cakes, and pancakes, whatever you do. And so bread wasn't a big worry to us. Like, as I said, our mum and dad made their own bread. Rabbits were our main part in meat, but back in those days, there used to be a lot of sheep, and you could go and buy a sheep off, some of the landowners, and they'd sell them to you very cheap. Well, we used to skin them ourselves and hang them up, and then we'd cut them up, and all that. But no, we had meat, but we couldn't get a lot because we never had really good fridges. Those days, we had one of the old ones that you used to run on kerosene. You used to light them up, and you always had kerosene smell on your hands by fiddling around with the wick to keep it going. But it kept your meat cold. Wouldn't freeze it, but it kept it cold and things. And lots of times they used to hang up the old meat cages, what they had, and they used to put a wet bag over that, and they used to put their butter and a lot of the other stuff in it, like bit of meat, and that used to keep it pretty good for a day or two. I never went into the cultural work until about 23 or 24 years ago, and I started working with some archaeologists through the Land Council. And then I started to get my experience with them, and National Parks and Wildlife got me onto a lot of work too, and I used to do a lot with them. And that is how I learnt my cultural. And then we started to, we didn't learn the language till quite a few years after. And the government decided to give out money so that the language could be brought back, because it was just about a lost language, you know, and even with our culture was starting to be lost too. But now, eventually now, a lot of the language has gotten out and we teach it. We go into schools and everything and we teach it, and plus we also teach our culture, which is the greatest thing. And I was only talking to a lady this morning when I'm doing this interview about, there's a lady over in Germany, she teaches the Aboriginal culture. They asked, first thing they asked was, do you know anything about the Aboriginal culture in Australia? And she was telling me this morning that the crowd that she gets is just enormous, because they wanted to learn about the culture here. But we also done that, me and my son also done that through Tamworth High. They used to send, you know, their students across to exchange, you know, with other countries. And so a lot of the students, they came back. The first thing they used to ask us was, do we know anything about the Australian Aboriginal culture? And they said no, they only knew a couple of little things, they just got off the top of their head. So what we done then, through Tamworth High and through Mr. Hall, he was the deputy principal there then, and we made up these packages of the Aboriginal culture, and we used to give every exchange student a copy of the culture so that they could take with them. And then when they got across there and they asked them about Australian Aboriginal culture, well, they just pulled it out of the bag and they could sit down and talk and tell them about it. So it was a great thing. I've worked with archaeologists, like Jan Wilson was one, Patrick Gaynor was another one, and I've also worked with different archaeologists, one from Armidale, a couple from Sydney, and that's where I got a lot of the experience, you know, working with archaeologists and, you know, doing the culture part. Well, we used to go out, we'd walk the land where there was, like they were requested by some farmer or some organisation to do that part of the work, and then they'd come and they'd ring me up and they said, can you come out on a survey with us? And that's exactly what I'd done. If I thought it was an artefact at that time, like it was a little bit hard on me in the first part, but if I thought it was an artefact, I used to show them, I'd sing out to them. They'd come over and they'd identify it then as being an artefact, and then we'd walk specifically around that area. And when they said that it was a site, they used to write it down and then they'd record it to National Parks and Wildlife. And that's the way it was recorded. And now in Tamworth alone, I think there's 175. I've got a map. There's 175 different sites around Tamworth and in the Moore Creek area.